Hello guys, hope you are doing great here. Thank you for coming. So let's get started. And my presentation called Photogrammetry Techniques in Textures and Props Creation, and I would like to start from the areas where we use photogrammetry. And there are three main areas. It's texture creation, model creation, and prototyping. The first one, texture creation. We started our work and our research in the field of photogrammetry from texture creation for terrain, and then we moved to creating objects and prototyping. So here you can see some examples of various models that can be created with photogrammetry. It can be various totally different objects, from small one to large enough, and you can use them in totally various ways. So, and the last thing where we apply photogrammetry is prototyping. And by prototyping, I mean creating 3D references or blueprints or drawings, as you prefer, for the main content of our game, the tanks. And when we scan the tank, we get not only a reliable reference, but a set of information that can be used to improve the final quality of the model. Damage information, texture information, small details, and so on and so on. And we also use photogrammetry to create 3D references of the buildings, especially when we need to create them in most realistic and authentic way. So let's move on to software that we use. And here is not a lot to talk about. We are using Agisoft Photoscan. 3 years, almost 4 years ago, when we started our researches in this area, it was most suitable for us, most suitable software solution for us. But here I want to tell you about another serious player on the market. It is reality capture. We thought about purchasing it due to its main advantage, its speed. It's very, very fast, especially when you compare it with Photoscan. But the problem is that it costs a lot. So we still use Photoscan. But here I need to say that there are much more software solutions on the market. They can be free, they can be paid with web interface or standalone, so you can do your own research and pick the right one for you. For example, I want to mention Mushroom. It's totally free software solution, and as far as I can see, it delivers quite good results. So we are planning to research it in the near future. So let's move on to hardware. And I want to start from the very beginning, a kind of a starter kit. You need to have when you work with photogrammetry. And the first thing is the camera. And camera can be It can be any camera you can get. Every camera you have at hand. DSLR, mirrorless, compact camera, even mobile phone camera can do with some issues. So the next thing you need is the tripod. We use tripods to avoid camera shakes, and the camera shakes is very critical thing to get good scan result at the end. So you can use anything, tripod, monopod, or something else you can find. And the last thing is a color checker, and we use it to do most accurate adjustments of albedo texture. But here I want to say that literally not a single texture in our game has its original albedo values, but we're still using it to have a kind of base or starting point for the future. So about a little bit more about cameras. We use Nikon cameras and Nikon lenses. It's kind of legacy. We had a couple of cameras when we started to work with photogrammetry, and we use Nikon lenses because of their sharpness. They can deliver the sharpest results in the industry. So we use a bunch of lenses for the different situations. For example, when you trying to scan a large object like a building, you want to use a wide-angle lens, and when you want to scan a long-distance object that can be reached clear or reached close enough, you want to use the zoom lens, and so on and so on. So each camera and each lens are used in appropriate conditions. Also, we use DJI drones to do air shooting. We need them when we want to use when we want to create some macro tiles for the terrain, or we want to scan a huge object like a mountain maybe, or something like that. And when we want to get to the top of the object, that can be reached with a regular camera. But when you do not have a drone and you want to scan a macro tile, what can you use? For example, this telescopic pole, it's quite cheaper than a drone. It has 3 meters height, and you can mount your camera on the top of it. The results are pretty good. We used it a lot. And the next thing we use is optical scanner. Its effective distance is between 20 and 40 centimeters. And we use it to get very high detail scans. For example, complicated surfaces, face scans, and so on and so on. I need to say that it was purchased not a long time ago, and we are still looking for the ways that we can use it. The processes. And for the texture creation, the process is quite forward. Shooting, computing, baking the textures, styling the textures, and tuning them up. And the shooting process can look like that, or like that, or even like that. we had a lot strange, awkward situations during our scans. And here I need to say that during scanning, you need to have a brew. It can create a shadow, for example, like this. It can hold a ladder for you and much useful and safety things. And here are the results of scanning. It's from our trip to Spain. We were scanning the sand, textures, rocks, and so on and so on. And here I want to say that you would probably need to have a system. Right names, right folders, proper descriptions, and so on, because the amount of information is quite big. We brought from Spain about 30,000 photos. So let's move on, and here's the computing stage. We load the photos usually to Lightroom. There we make a color checker, adjustments, removing shadows, highlights, sharpening, denoising, and so on. And then we export textures to the photo scan. And we, when we get model and the texture, we bake it. And here you can use any software you want. We use in general XNormal, but it can be algorithmic products, Substance Painter, Substance Designer, Maya, Max, any product that you have at hand. And as the same for the tiling textures. The thing is that you need to tile 4 or 5 textures at once, and someone uses Substance Painter, someone uses Substance Designer. I personally prefer to use Photoshop to tile the textures. And here you can see the final result. On the left hand is there is a photo. On the right hand you can see in-game result. And talking about color checker and true albedo values, our level artists came in play here, and they tuned the texture up to they apply some fancy stuff like wetness map and so on and so on, and you can't talk here about true albedo, but we still trying to save it for the future projects. And as for the air shooting, this process looks like pretty much like that. One person controlled the drone, second person controlled the camera, and we trying to use the drones when we need to get to the places that we can't reach with our regular cameras. And for the model creation, is the same process: shooting, computing, cleaning up the scan results in ZBrush, removing artifacts, retopologizing, texturing. And by texturing I mean you already have the texture. You just need to remove ambient occlusion or shadow information from it. So, and then you can export it to your engine. Here's the example. This scan was made here in Prague, not far from here. The original model has about 2 to 10 millions of polys, and the final model on the right hand has 7,000 polys, I guess. And here I want to talk about the equipment you need. For example, this cam was made in dark conditions. I was not allowed to use a tripod, so the shooting was done from hands. And I was forced to use high ISO values. So maybe you want to use, for example, Nikon D5 to have appropriate results during your shooting. And the next example is our scan of a tank. It's a T-82 tank. We made more than 1,000 photos, and it took about 2 or 3 days to calculate the final model. But it was worth it. We had reliable reference. We had a lot of stuff to use in future, surface details, damages, and so on and so on. And here is another example. And I found it on internet, credits to guys from Topafly. It was created with Phantom 4 drone and Sony camera. The scan has more than 2,000 photos, and the final model has 500 million of polygons. So the thing is that it's quite appropriate to use this scan as a reference, but you don't need as much polygons for the reference. You don't need to spend the time to calculate more than 2,000 photos. It's a lot. I don't want to think what time was spent to calculate this model, so it's not a production. And what are the main requirements? And the first and the main one is you need a plan. What will you shoot? When will you shoot? What equipment will you use? And these things are connected to each other. You need to have a clear understanding of the end results. What would it be? A tile, or some surface details, or complete model, or a part of a model. And you need to have enough material to scan, and good weather conditions, and it all connected to each other, these things. And also you need a proper amount of photos. It's also planning, and the amount of photos depends on what result you want to get in the end. Here's another example of air shooting. And here our level artist said, I want exactly this part of terrain, so go get it. And we went and get it. It was too large to shoot it from hand, so we used drones. You can see a lot of parasite lighting information on it, but it was not important for us in this case, so we were need only geometry from this scan. And another example, we call it gray boxes. It's a kind of prototyping. So we use scans when we need to create the most authentic, the most reliable objects for our game. And what about tough situations? You don't have material to scan. You have bad weather conditions and other limitations. For example, restricted areas of flight. In our country, we have such areas. So here is an example. We will need to create authentic barricade. But barricades are quite rare in peaceful life, and going to a war conflict zone is not an option at all. So we decided to create the barricade by ourselves. We bought linen bags, filled them with the sand, built a barricade, and so on and so on. So here's the result. It's quite good. But there is small issue. It was fun, but very, very hard work. Here some, not all, but some examples what we've done with these linen bags. We spent a week to build it and scan it. So let's move on. When you can't build the material or you don't want, no worries. Thank you very much to the guys from Algorithmic. Here is some examples. On the right hand you can see the reference. It's textures.com, I guess. And on the left hand, you can see the tile created in Substance Designer. So it's quite an option. Why not to use it? And here is another example. We will need to create the texture for the building. But the thing is that we needed 2 or 3 options of this texture. But we had not enough material to scan. So we created it in Substance Designer and used it for production. And here are some general examples. When the question is to scan or not to scan, does it worth it? And this is the situation when the answer is definitely yes. You don't want to sculpt this model, texture this model from scratch. It's much easier to scan this guy. I think, yeah, he was scanned 2 kilometers from here on the graveyard a year ago. And here's another situation, a big, large object. You probably will say, yeah, I want to scan it, but what reason? It's a simple object. You will spend your time to cover it, to get on the top of it. You will need to use a drone, and so on and so on. You will spend the time to calculate due to amount of photos you'll get in the end. So it's not the situation when you want to scan this object. It's much easier to model it without scan. And in the end, I want to show you some screenshots. And for me, they are the answer why photogrammetry is in so demand. This is the screenshots from our latest map. It's called Minsk, and we are very, very proud of it. We tried to build the most reliable and authentic copy of our city, and the players, our players, can compare in-game models and the models in real life, buildings and objects in real life. And here it's easier to point out the object that was not created with photogrammetry technology. Maybe trees. There was speed tree for the trees. Here is another screenshot. So you don't want to model it, sculpt it, and texture it from scratch, from zero. It's much easier to use Photoscan. What we have now, we are working to create a library, a global library for our development teams, and it's kind of base that will help in future development and future projects for different studios. So we have a web application. It can be reached by any artist from Wargaming, and he can find their models, the textures, and so on and so on. So it's pretty much all. Thank you for your attention. Maybe any questions?
Thank you, Vitaliy. I really enjoyed the well-structured speech, interesting topic, and a hint of humor. Thank you. Dear audience, please raise your hands, ask your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. Very, very interesting. My question is, while making photos, do you try to store additional information for following color matching? For example, just trying to capture current lighting conditions, current sun radiation by, for example, taking photo of metallic sphere and so on, just to make it a little bit easier.
As far as I can remember, this talk was in Jeffrey Williamson, maybe.
Yeah,
this guy. We saw these videos, and frankly speaking, we thought that it's kind of excessive amount of information that we need. So we don't try to repeat the conditions of environment, the conditions of lighting. Because I thought about it before. In the end, the textures are tuned up by another guy by their purposes. So.
Okay, thank you.
More questions, please.
Hi. How do you build roughness map from scan?
It's synthetic. Substance designer or
not automatically, just by
hands. Yeah. Yeah. You can use even 3DO, MDU.
Hello, my question is about what software is possible to use to create 3D model from the photo from the samples for that large object like mountains and like a building, because I personally tried Photoscan the small cat sculpture and it was very hard. The software doesn't work. So my question is, what software is it possible to use for that large Photoscan?
I know that guys use even Google Earth to get but you get not photos from there, but screenshots, and the results are pretty awesome.